Hi, this is Remembering the Past with Corey Franklin, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our society, our history, or our culture. And tonight we're going to start out with Don Carter. Don Carter was one of the greatest bowlers of the 20th century, probably the best bowler of the second half of the 20th century, and certainly the greatest bowler of the decade of the 1950s. Don Carter died recently at the age of 85. He was the right man at the right time in the right place. Before World War II, bowling was primarily a lower middle class, a blue-collar recreational activity. If you remember the movie Double Indemnity, you see Fred MacMurray bowling while he's contemplating a murder. But bowling took off after World War II for a number of reasons. You had all the GIs coming back from World War II who wanted to bowl. You had the baby boom. You had the real estate boom where bowling lanes and bowling alleys could be a major force for property development. And of course, you had television. Sports and television were merging. So you now had things like boxing on television, and it was inevitable you would get bowling on television, and bowling clubs and bowling leagues developed all throughout the United States. Bowling alleys were no longer a place where you simply might take a day to roll a couple of lines by yourself. They were now big business. Contrast Double Indemnity with the Big Lebowski and see how serious bowling became. Our great television bowlers included Ralph Cramden and Fred Flintstone. Into this mix came a real bowler, Don Carter, who was a superb athlete from St. Louis. Besides being a great bowler, he was a great baseball player. He played Legion baseball in St. Louis with those two famous catchers from the Hill in St. Louis, Joe Garagiola and Yogi Berra. But he found his niche in bowling after World War II with his unique style. He was Bowler of the Year 6 times in the 1950s and early 1960s. He rolled 13 perfect games in competition and another 6 299 games, one short of perfect games in competition. While there were other great bowlers, there was Dick Weber, there was Earl Anthony, there was Carmen Salvino, Don Carter also had the flair. He was the Arnold Palmer of bowling. And with television, he became a television star on the bowling shows of the 1950s. Here he is in one of those shows winning a tournament.
And Don Carter is renowned among the world's great bowlers, the second man in history to be national match game champion 2 years in a row.
This is the second game of a 4-game block position round in which the first man, Carter, bowls the second man, Weber. The third man, Lebansky, bowls the fourth man, Tom Hennessy. Don Carter has already beaten off the threat of Lebansky, who was runner-up to him.
The consolation bracket of the Masters tournament finds two Detroit teammates opposing each other in the finals. Young Don Carter versus the veteran Thurman Gibson.
Don Carter, the defending champion, only 3-time winner of the All-Star. And that is a strike for Don Carter. Boy, that one really finished, didn't it?
He puts together 6 strikes in a row for a 254 final game and wins 888 to 826. It's a 62-pin margin and a great comeback for a great champion. That's ABC's 10-pin showcase. Fun, thrills, excitement, drama, and congratulations from the ABC president.
Yeah, you get a real idea there what the 1950s were like with bowling shows. You don't have bowling shows on television anymore. They were on Wide World of Sports. They were all over. And you had the bowling associations promoting bowling. It got to be big business. So someone like Don Carter was a superstar. He was in every way as big as somebody like Arnold Palmer or Mickey Mantle. In fact, he did something that neither of those athletes did. He was the first athlete to get $1 million endorsement contract from Ebonite, which was a bowling ball manufacturer. He was also subsidized by Budweiser, a St. Louis company. So Don Carter was a true superstar of bowling in the 1950s and 1960s and was a television personality. And you know someone's a television personality in sports. By the time they got to the 1970s, he was a little past his prime, but he did, what else? A Miller beer commercial. We've done these with Joe Frazier. We did these with Bubba Smith. You know that the guy was a legend when he does one of these commercials. I'm pretty sure Don Carter was the only bowler to ever do a Miller commercial, and the interesting thing is he abandoned his hometown beer Budweiser for a Milwaukee company.
You know, for too long now, bowlers have been left out of light beer commercials, and football players have been grabbing all the glory. But bowlers know light beer from Miller tastes great. We know light's got a third less calories than the regular beer. We know light's less filling. Bowlers love light just as much as football players.
That's right.
And we also love the easy opening can.
You show, Doc.
Light beer from Miller. Everything you always wanted in a beer, and less.
That was Don Carter, the superstar of an American mid-century phenomenon, bowling. By the way, in closing on Don Carter, I just want to mention one other thing. He was married twice, and both his wives are in the International Bowling Hall of Fame. We're going to move on now to Frederica Sagor Maas. Frederica Sagor Maas died at the age of 111. She was the third oldest woman in California, and she was the documented 44th oldest person in the world when she died at 111. And Frederica Sagor Maas wasn't just famous for living a long time. She was a screenwriter in Hollywood, but she was a screenwriter for silent films. There are very, very few people left who were personally associated with silent films. Mickey Rooney comes to mind, and I can't think of too many others. But Frederica Sagor Maas was one of the people who was intimately associated with the industry. She was born in 1900 in New York City, and she studied journalism at Columbia, and she went to work as a copywriter for Universal Pictures in New York. In the early 1920s, late teens and 1920s, women's rights were a big issue in New York. It was only a couple years after the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, and women's rights had become a prominent issue after 150 women died in the fire, and there were a lot of women's movements. She was outspoken, and Universal promptly fired her, and she moved out to California, and at 23 she got a screenwriting job in Hollywood. She was fantastically talented, and at the age of 25, she wrote the script for the 1925 movie The Plastic Age. The Plastic Age was the biggest film at the time for Clara Bow. Clara Bow was the it girl. She was considered the Marilyn Monroe of the 1920s. Again, the biggest sex symbol of the 1920s, and Frederica Sagor was writing for her. The problem was that even in the silent film industry, Hollywood was a cutthroat business. A couple of years later, she married Ernest Maas, and they began their screenwriting careers together, and they wrote for such stars as Greta Garbo, Rudolph Valentino, and Norma Shearer during the silent industry. But many of their scripts were plagiarized, and many were stolen. To compound this, as a husband and wife screenwriting team, they were considered sort of troublemakers, and when Talkies came in, they found it harder to get work, and they found it even harder to get work in the 30s and 40s, when they became suspected of communist activities, which wasn't unusual for people coming out of New York at the turn of the century. So Ernest Maas and Frederica Sagor, as husband and wife team, couldn't find work in Hollywood. At one point in 1950, they considered suicide. They drove to a cliff overlooking Hollywood, considered driving their car off, then looked at each other and decided that they had each other and they would abandon Hollywood. They'd been humiliated by Hollywood, but because they still had each other, they carried on. They had an almost 60-year marriage. She became an insurance adjuster. She actually did get one final screen credit in 1947 for a movie called The Shocking Miss Pilgrim, starring Betty Grable, which was a sort of a remake of The Plastic Age, but it was, of course, completely rewritten and didn't look anything like the 1925 Clara Bow classic. When Frederica Sagor Maas was 99 years old in 1999, she wrote her memoirs, a 300-page book called The Shocking Miss Pilgrim, a writer in early Hollywood, where she dished the dirt on some of the famous people from the early days of Hollywood in the silent films. Louis Mayer, Clara Bow, Irving Thalberg. It was a real tell-all of what the silent film industry was like, and as I said before, it was just as bad and just as cutthroat as Hollywood is today, or as Hollywood has been at any time during its history. Frederica Sagor Maas had incredible talent, she had incredible guts, she had incredible willpower, but at one point she said that if she had it to do over again, she would be a wash lady. So it speaks to the tragedy of what Hollywood can do to you. And Frederica Sagor Maas, who outlived almost all her enemies, was one of the last remaining vestiges of the silent film industry, we can truly say we will not see her like again. I'm going to close on that. I want to thank my producer Sid Tepps. In closing tonight, there are very few songs about Hollywood that capture the tragic essence of the place, but one of the ones that does, in fact it might be the best one that does, is a 1972 song by the brilliant Ray Davies called Celluloid Heroes, and it talks about what Hollywood is really like, and in fact, ironically, it mentions a couple of the people, including Greta Garbo and Rudolph Valentino, who Frederica Sagor Maas wrote for. Here is Ray Davies with Richie Sambora with a little bit of Celluloid Heroes as a tribute to Frederica Sagor Maas, who died at 111.
Everybody's a dreamer, and everybody's a star, and everybody's in movies. It doesn't matter who you are. There are stars in every city, in every house and on every street. And if you walk down Hollywood Boulevard, their names are written in concrete. Don't tread on Greta Garbo as you walk down the boulevard. She looks so weak and fragile, that's why she tried to be so hard. But they turned her into a princess, and they sat her on a throne. But she turned her back on stardom, because she wanted to be alone. Well, you can see all the stars as you walk down Hollywood Boulevard. Some that you recognize, some that you haven't even heard of. People who worked, suffered and struggled for fame. Some who succeeded, some who suffered in vain. Rudolph Valentino looks very much alive, and he looks up ladies' dresses as they sadly pass him by. Everybody's a dreamer, and everybody's a star, and everybody's in showbiz. It doesn't matter who you are. But those who are successful, be always on your guard. Success walks hand in hand with failure along the Hollywood Boulevard.